Hello everyone. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to access the selected objects using code. In the intro tutorials, you had the setup for either 2D or 3D, and you were able to select the objects with your pointer, but now you want to be able to manipulate these objects, and I'll show you how. If you go to the documentation, you'll find the section called How to Access Selected Objects in C#. There are two basic ways to access selected objects. The first way is that you can access the array or list directly. How do you do that? By calling the input manager singleton instance and then calling the selector object, and inside the selector object you have the selected objects. It's an array of selectables. So in this example we're going to try to call the selected objects array by using this for each function. So I'm going to copy it and I'm going to create a new script called test. Inside the test function, yes, reload. Okay, so inside the test function, I am going to use the onEnable function from Unity just to show you some good example on how you can get an error and to show you quickly. Okay, so now that we have our for each and our test, we just need to add it to the scene. So let's go ahead and add it here. By the way, I am using the 3D example scene provided by the Falcon Selection box package. It doesn't have to be 3D or 2D, it works in either. Okay, so I'm going to show you first what happens if you just run your script by calling it onEnable. You get an error. Why is this? Because you're trying to call the input manager before it finishes setting up itself. It needs to set this instance to the reference of input manager, and because it hasn't finished doing that, onEnable is getting called before you're getting an error. Okay, now I'm going to continue by calling this function after I do a selection. So I have my selected objects in here, and my for each is getting called onEnable. So successfully called, I get the name of all the objects that are selected. Cool. Now, what if I want to know the selected objects right after the selection happens, sorry. There's, in the second example, I show you exactly how to do this. You registered your function to a delegate or an event called onFinishedSelecting. This onFinishedSelecting is provided by the selector object or the selector class. So we need to define a function with the same signature as onFinishedSelecting. That means that we need a function that receives an array of selectables and it returns void. So let's go ahead and copy this, put it in our function, in our class, sorry. Apparently I got some formatting errors from the copy pasting. Let's fix this. Okay, I'm gonna comment out our previous onEnable function. Okay, so we have our function. Now, how do we register it to the event? Well, if we do this, by adding our function to the onFinishedSelecting delegate, the system will be calling my finish selecting function every time this delegate gets called. Now, it is a good practice to unregister the events every time my component gets disabled, because if not, your function will keep getting called even if your component is disabled, and you'll get errors. Okay, so now that we have everything set up, we can go back to our scene and let's Let's finish compiling. We select a few things and you can see our function getting called. Let's try it again. Select a few things and you can see that the selection has finished when the box disappears. Okay, so it got selected again. What about, remember we also had a click event that selects a single object. Let's try that. Oh, it's also getting called. Cool. So by simply attaching my function to the unfinished selection, it's getting the reference to all the objects that are selected currently. I got an error because I'm trying to call the input manager on disable. Sometimes it gets called before or after. You can add a further null check, like if you were really wanting to be really thorough, you could say this is out of the scope, but I'm just gonna show you it's not equals to null, and that way you avoid some errors. Anyways, the selection was working. You have access to a lot of events and you can see it in the documentation. If you go to the different systems, say for example the input system, you have a section called events provided, and almost every event, almost every case that you need to access is provided by the different systems. So we have input, selector, and selectable. Go ahead and check them out, read them a little bit, and play with them. I hope this tutorial was helpful to you, and if you have any more questions, feel free to drop me an email or contact me in any way that you find.